Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vanoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Asure. Asure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show. 2024 Employment Law Updates. Welcome to Mission to Grow. I'm Mike Vanoy, your host. And today my guest, couldn't think of anybody better, our dear friend, regular of the show if you watch, Mary Simmons. Mary is the Vice President of HR Compliance at Asure. She's a SHRM certified professional. Also for the past 8 years, Mary has been an adjunct professor at New York Institute of Technology. Prior to Asure, Mary was the director of HR consulting for a 58-year-old HR consulting firm in New York. Mary, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
So happy 2024 to you. Lots of big legal changes on the employment front. Before we go any further, if someone was to only maybe catch the first minute of the show, what's the one thing that employers really need to understand about employment law changes if they're serious about, if they're truly on a mission to grow their business?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mike. I think it's a good one. I think business owners are always thinking about auditing maybe their accounting systems or, looking at the machinery if they're a manufacturer every year. But you also have to look at your HR foundation and everything in it. So not only the compliance and whether you're in compliance or not, because that doesn't just happen in January, but are you set to have your HR function support you in your growth, right? Do you have succession planning if you're going to grow, your staff, right? So if you're promoting somebody, do you have somebody to backfill them? Or are you doing training if you don't, so that the rest of your organization can continue to function as you promote people up and onwards, right? What's your compensation plan look like if you're going to be expanding? So there's a lot of considerations on the HR front that employers need to focus on. And I always just think the beginning of the year is a great time to do it, right? You're setting up your SMART goals, looking at your HR foundation should be part of that.
Yeah, and you know what? We'll probably save for another show some of the more productivity oriented people stuff. And we won't trick the audience here. The title is 2024 Employment Law Updates. But clearly, if you're going to grow your business, you're not going to do it by yourself, probably, unless you're a solopreneur, your early days. You're going to need the help of people. So do you have the right people on the bus? Do you have any blockers that you need to get off the bus? Do you have the right competencies identified and in all the HR practices that come after that to make sure that you have the team that can really build your company? So with that, let's jump to the legal updates. You and I have talked many times that one of the mega trends is that HR laws, employment laws are continually being fractionalized, not just from the federal, but down to the state, to the city, to the county, to the local municipalities. These laws layer on top of each other. There are literally hundreds of updates. We could never cover all of them, but let's get into the big ones. Certainly they're at the federal level. This first one, what are the big employment law changes that have either been enacted or are going to be enacted and they're going to really impact everybody here in 2024?
Yeah. And it's a great question as well. So one of the biggest pieces of legislation that's hanging out there, I think it's really the biggest legislation on the federal level that's come down in at least 3 or 4 years, is that the Department of Labor is looking at the white collar and highly compensated salaries and looking to increase them April of this year.
Yeah.
So look, we don't have definitive information on this that it's definitely going to go through. During the Obama administration, they tried to have this go through and it failed. But I really feel strongly, just my advice, that it will go through in April.
Yeah.
And if it goes through in April, Mike, it has significant impact on many, many businesses. Let me give you a great example. When I'm helping with the employers that we assist with employment laws, there's a lot of states that don't have a lot of employment laws. So you know that when you and I are talking about the changes, and we're going to talk about some uh, later on here, we're always New York, California, Washington, Colorado, right? We're talking those states with heavy employment law,
Yeah.
right? We're not normally talking about North Carolina, South Carolina, Iowa, Florida,
Right.
right? This DOL change will have significant impact on those states that have not increased their minimum wage, their hourly minimum wage, above the federal $7.25, or they've only inched it up a little bit. And the reason for that is because if their minimum wage is that low, their white collar and highly compensated salaries are probably low as well.
Yeah.
So it's going to be significant. Now, when I talked about, employers looking at their HR functions, a Fair Labor Standards Act audit should be done in the beginning of the year every year, right?
Yeah.
But this year, it is very important that it's done. So, this change is significant. Those white collar exemptions, of course, are the executive, professional, and administrative exemptions. And they're currently sitting at $684 a week, which is 35,500 and change a year. Okay.
Yeah.
It's going up significantly. They're proposing that it goes up to a little over $1,000 a week, which means it'll be a little more than 55,000 annually. That's a big difference, Mike, for a small business.
Mary, I'm going to pause for a
Yeah,
second. So,
it's a lot.
So folks who are regular watchers of the show, they've seen this. If you haven't heard this before, I encourage you to jump back into prior episodes. You and I have talked about this because there's an exempt versus non-exempt classification. There's the exemptions for that classification topic. There is certainly most everybody knows minimum wage. That's pretty straightforward, but very few people, I believe, know about the minimum salary requirement for exempt employees. So if you're exempt, that means you're exempt from overtime. So you're a salaried person. There's no such thing in the eyes of law as a salaried person. You're an exempt employee. A lot of people just don't realize that there's a minimum you must pay people if they're going to be an exempt employee. And that's what's going way, way, way up here. So,
correct.
So encourage everybody to check out prior episodes. We go hour-long deep dives of these topics. We're going to do a bunch more between now and April 1st as things become clearer. But just so everybody understands, this thing was put into, so rumors all 2023 that this was coming. End of summer, early fall. Okay, the DOL publishes the draft of the rule. And it says it explicitly. So you go from a minimum salary for an exempt person of $35,568 a year to $55,068. It's like massive increase that you would have to pay all these people.
Huge.
Now, it went through what they call the comment period, right? It's gone through the comment period. And now what we're hearing is it's going to be implemented April 1st. Something could happen, could delay. We're in a crazy political time frame right now. It might get phased in, but as of right now, everybody should be thinking this rule from the DOL has gone through the comment period. They've signaled that April 1 is going to be the date. You should be prepared for this thing to hit your desk April 1st and be ready to deal with it, regardless if things change downstream, because this is that big. I'm not overstating this, am I?
You're not overstating it. I mean, listen, I just want to mention, I'm sure if you're in the States where this won't be as big of an effect, being, New York and California, who already raised their salaries for white collar. it's not going to be as big of a deal. But for the states that have not increased that on their own, this federal edict will be huge. It'll be a big impact. We will go over this again, Mike, because there is just so much to unpack here. And I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that employers are prepared, understand how it affects them, what
Yeah.
can they do to protect themselves, et cetera.
I've been having lots of conversations with business owners here. And I think there's maybe it's easy to think, oh my gosh, the government is going to make me give everyone massive raises. So if you're in a high end white collar kind of environment, you maybe you don't have many employees that are exempt employees with a salary under 55,000 anyway. So maybe this doesn't impact you. But think about huge industries. I think the estimate is like 3.5 million employees can be impacted here. Maybe your retail, maybe your hospitality,
Right.
yeah, you're some type of
Manufacturing.
manufacturing where you are an exempt employee, you're on salary, but your salary is less than 55. To give everyone raises from 35 to 55, it would probably break most small businesses. They just simply couldn't afford it.
Right.
I think what people start to realize, and business owners I've been talking to, is, whoa, this is not so much. It is a mandate in the minimum salary, but what this is really doing is forcing me to put exempt people as hourly people and better understand what these exemptions actually are
Right.
for exempt status in the first place. Can you say more about that? Am I hitting on something here? And how do you think people should be thinking about minimum salary versus just correctly classifying people as hourly?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's one of the first projects that I'm going to do with an employer. After the handbook, we're going to probably look at job descriptions, which are going to drive your exemptions and make sure that people are classified correctly. And, you know, understanding that salary can be the biggest expense, especially for a small employer, this is a big deal. And that's why we try to plan for this. What are the raises going to be this year? What's the impact on the business? Um, but, there's a lot of other things you have to consider with this. There's going to be some compression, right? Because your middle manager might have been making 36,000. Now you got to bring them up to 55, and their manager was making 55. So
Right.
you don't need to increase the manager's pay rate, or do you? Are they going to want to quit because now the person they supervise is making the same amount of money? So you really have to think very specifically about about this. What we literally will do is we do a full payroll run and a full Fair Labor Standards Act audit, which has a lot of different pieces to it, and figure out, what's going to be the cost. And, I also want to mention, and I think our listeners probably know this, Mike, but a lot of states' minimum wage also goes up in January. So that's something I also want employers to remember, that January usually makes the minimum wage, your hourly worker rate, go up also. So all of this is going to have a huge impact on employers, and I want them to be prepared for this, both financially, but also from a cultural standpoint. How are you going to communicate this?
Big time, because you hit it on the head. There's the compression issue. So I have a manager who's got a salary of 36, another one who's got one of 55, and all of a sudden now you're getting paid the same. You're going to have to deal with that. So either
Yep.
you're going to give the level 2 manager a raise, or you're going to put, and so that'll have issues, either budgetary or psychologically or both. The manager who is sitting at, say, the $36,000 salary, $37,000 salary now, if you put them on as a non-exempt employee, and now they're paid hourly, this is probably going to be one of the hardest things, I think, for employers. Just psychologically, there's something culturally, maybe not psychologically, culturally, where people are like, yeah, I'm salary now. It feels like a milestone in their career. Now, a lot of times they quickly realize, boy, I'm working a lot more hours for the same damn pay. Yeah, and that's what's really driving this, to make sure employers aren't having a manager who makes $36,000 work 80 hours a week, right?
Exactly.
They're ensuring they're actually going to get their overtime. But the
Agreed.
cultural issues around going from salary to hourly, then the budget issues, do I give them a raise or do I take them hourly? And by the way, you have to qualify for the exemption. You just don't get to just choose that. But then you're going to deal with the overtime. And if it's the overtime, am I better off just hiring another person? There's a
Right.
lot to think through.
There's a lot. There's a lot. And like you said, we're going to prepare employers, those that we support, we're already preparing them. But we're going to, have other webinars on how to prepare for this, because like I said, this is literally the biggest piece of legislation coming out of the federal government in 3 to 4 years. So it's a biggie for most
Probably the
employers.
biggest thing since, CARES Act, kind of PPP, ERTC kind of employment law leave types. I mean, I agree. This is probably the biggest thing in 3 years.
Yeah.
Let's speculate just for a minute about implementation here. Let's move on to some of our other topics. This is the biggest, so it's right that we're spending this much time on it.
Yeah.
What do you think happens April 1? Is this binary boom, deal with everybody? Do you think this could get phased in? What do you think is going to happen here?
From every indication that I've read and continue to read and try to keep up with this, I do believe it's going to be, not phased in, which is sort of counterintuitive, right? The states normally, when they increase the minimum wage, they've been phasing them in if that minimum wage is going up significantly. So I'm a little surprised by that. So that may change, right? So we're still a little bit in the dark about exactly how this is going to be, what the go forward, strategy for the DOL is. But every indication I have is, sometime in April, it's go time like that with no phase
Yeah.
in.
Back in
That could change. That could
back,
change.
back in September, I was predicting that this would be, because this is such a big move, that some lobbying entities would get to Congress and say, hey, go influence DOL here. You can't, the system can't handle this all at once. I expected through the comment period there to be something come out about a phased implementation, and it hasn't come out. So
I know. I'm shocked too.
I think there's a chance still. But I
Agreed.
think you're right. I think employers need to be prepared. And by the way, there are different laws that apply to different size businesses, right? So if you're more than 20 employees, you got to now comply with COBRA. You've got more than 50 full-time employees, the Affordable Care Act. There's different thresholds. Some laws, federal laws, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, right? OSHA, you got to provide a safe work environment. Minimum wage, 1 employee or 100 employees, you got to pay the minimum wage. This is one of those. This is
Yes.
FLSA. This is exempt versus non-exempt. This is the minimum wage for hourly, minimum salary for the exempt employees. It doesn't matter if you're a 1 or 2 or 5 person company. This applies to you.
Agreed. That's why it's so significant.
Yeah, right. All right.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. Future episodes of the show, we will talk more about this topic as we learn more and we approach the April 1st deadline. Let's move on. I think you gave me 7 kind of major themes here for employment law changes in 24. What's the next one for you?
So the next one that I wanted to talk about was non-compete. And, I realize this doesn't impact everybody, but non-competes continue to be challenged. So what happens in a court of law is that the judge is going to say, hey, Mike Vinoy was a salesperson for Mary Inc. and he leaves. He has a non-compete that says, he can't do any kind of sales for anybody in a certain regional area that was similar to what he was doing for Mary Inc. And what actually the Department of Labor has been ruling is that Mike has the right to make a living, and you're, severely, handicapping his ability to make a living with that non-compete. So that's what's being challenged in the courts. California has basically banned them. Very, very hard to uphold in New York, I would say. They're basically, almost banned in New York. And it's just really making it difficult for employers to keep their market share, right?
Yeah.
So, listen, this is how I would recommend that we prepare for this. Number one, again, great time to look at your non-competes. Have those non-competes reviewed by a professional, right? You're not going to see your blind spots if you wrote that non-compete. So
Or
you really
copy
need to have it
Google.
looked at by a professional.
You,
What were you saying? I'm
whether
sorry.
you wrote it or you copied it off of Google, you're not going to know your blind.
Right, exactly, right. Um, so, you know, you also want to, have open conversations with your employees, right? So your first line of defense is keeping your employees happy and engaged. And I realize that people are always going to leave for various reasons. Right? They need more money, etc. But if we're keeping our employees happy and engaged, and they don't leave, then this is going to be less of an issue. And even if they do leave, and understand, that, they don't go directly after your clients, but maybe go after, ancillary clients. I think it'll make everybody a little bit happier. But I think that having a professional look at your non-compete, do they feel like it'll have any traction whatsoever in a court of law, right? And then if it needs to be adjusted, you need to talk to a professional about that as well. A non-compete normally should be given at hire. Very difficult for this type of a condition of employment to be given after hire. Edits would be acceptable in most cases, but again, this all needs to be looked at by professionals, and you need guidance from professionals to work through these, because each state is going to have a different nuance on non-competes. That's kind of what we're dealing with, right? Because we support clients in, multi-states. It's different in almost every state. I haven't seen two states look at this the same. Let me put it that way.
The old adage, train your employees so they're qualified to go anywhere, treat them so that they will never want to leave you, right? That's all fine
Exactly.
and good. You should do that. That's a great principle. The reality is you might have trade secrets. You might have a great sales process. You might have great messaging and strategies in your marketing and how you go to market. You might have, maybe it's not patented, but you might have manufacturing processes that are unique and give you a competitive advantage you don't want out the door. Knowing that these things continually don't stand up in court, and I think that trend is just going to continue, right?
It is.
The continuum is clear. Power shifting from employer to employee, that has been going on for 70 years. It's not changing. It's going to keep on going. What practical things should employers do or think about when it comes to non-competes?
Yeah, I think I hit most of the high points on that, but that non-compete's got to be looked at by a professional and on an annual basis, minimally. And are you going over that non-compete with your employee, right? They might have signed it 10 years ago, Mike. I really do feel it's important to cover it with employees, especially in the states where it may have a little bit of traction. I would go over that with employees in a very positive way, right? Be like, don't leave me because you have a non-compete, right? Not in a threatening way, but they should understand that, in a positive way. Again, that's what we guide the employers on, right? Having positive communications. And I think that, if you work that way, right? How am I going to keep my employees engaged so they stay? But if they leave, is my non-compete going to hold up? I think that's the best way for you to prepare.
Yeah. So, and I didn't ask the question the way I probably meant to. You're not advocating that people abandon this, saying, "Oh, can't do
No,
non-competes anymore." You can still do them, but they're way
correct.
more nuanced. So it's a get a professional opinion on do we think this will stick or not? You can't guarantee anything, but do we think this would stick in a court or in a hearing? And then two, presentation and communication matters as you talk to employees. How is it that you communicate these things? That, hey, I'm not trying to hamstring you. I'm not trying to prevent you from feeding your family. I hope you never leave us.
Right.
I want you to help me make this an amazing company. And I want to beat the competition. And I want you and I to do this together. I want to make sure that those advantages don't leave the building, so to speak. So there's
Agreed. And now I sort of know what you were asking. Thank you for the clarification. So I'll give you a quick story. Um, we had an employer that was asking us about the non-competes. We reviewed them together. They looked pretty good. They were not in New York or California, so we felt pretty comfortable. But what I'd like to ask the employers when I'm working on a project with them is, what are your concerns, right? Why are we looking at these? I know why I'm concerned about it, but I want to know why you're concerned about it. And what came out of that meeting, Mike, was that they had one top salesperson who owned their biggest clients. And so when we talk about preparing, and I'm glad you dove a little bit deeper, my suggestion is, why is only one person the point of contact for your biggest clients, right? Your biggest clients should have as much hand holding and as much contact with as many people at your organization as possible. And that will make it a lot more difficult, right? Even if you didn't have a non-compete, they should be doing business with Mary Inc. versus doing business with Mike Vinoy. So that was our advice for this client. We created an SOP. They changed some of their account management practices and
yeah.
felt a lot more secure that those big accounts weren't going to walk out the door if that rainmaker, that best salesperson, walked out the door.
That's really smart advice. I like that, Mary. So yeah, in the olden days of, I don't know, a decade or three ago,
Yeah,
you might say, okay, I want to hire account executives. Your job is to develop deep relationships with the primary contact in the people in our biggest accounts. And that's how you would guide them. And
right.
then you put the golden handcuffs on them and say, oh, by the way, non-compete, you can't call on them. So you protect yourself as well. Some of these changes in HR law is not about the transaction itself. Non-compete, good or bad, or you can do it, you can't do it. This is the language I can or can't use. You really should be thinking about your entire business practice. So
Yeah,
if these are not as enforceable as they used to be, maybe your strategy isn't to assign account execs who develop these deep relationships by themselves, and you develop more of a team approach. How do you
that's
touch
right.
and it's a derivative of the change in HR law, not just a strategy in of itself. So I really like that. That's good advice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just add one quick other thing. When I do compensation, so another organization, we restructured their compensation plan so that their sales reps got money um, in perpetuity or for 5 years, depending on the type of account it was, rather than getting this huge payout when they bring the client in. They they lowered that, and then year 2 they got some comp, year 3, right? So they were incentivized to stay at the organization, to continue getting compensation from that account, but also they're compensated to, engage in some account management responsibilities and stroking that client and keeping a good relationship with that client so the client doesn't leave.
Yeah,
It worked really well for that second employer.
that's great. That's great. All right, let's move to the next one. The federal government, I'd say on a national stage, there was a public debate, right, about privatization of 401k, privatization of Social Security, good or bad, lots of commercials of pushing old ladies off of cliffs in wheelchairs. And it was a visceral public debate, right?
Yeah. Yes.
It hasn't happened for a very long time, but the federal government is acting and states are acting to ensure folks have retirement set up.
Yeah. It's
Right.
helpful.
And so it's no longer, I think this is no longer a national debate. There's we've done episodes in the past here where we talk about federal tax credits, but the states are doing something here around retirement. Help unpack this next one for us.
Yeah, and look, I like to look at everything from, how is it a positive for the employer? And number one, if you're forced to have a savings plan, now this is something that I'd put on your ads when you're attracting
Right.
new employees to get the best talent. It'll help you keep the best talent, and it's a great benefit for your employees. So I do think that even though you may be in a state that is mandating this, and as an employer, you might say, yikes, how am I going to do this? I think you want to look at the positives. And I do feel like there are some positives, not only for the employees, but for the employers. Starting January of this year, we're up to 16 states that are mandating a savings plan. Some of those courts, New York, California, but Vermont, Illinois, Washington State, Massachusetts, or make up some of those 16. So it's not, just New York and California.
And
I
Mary,
think sorry.
important to note, 16 have enacted legislation. I want to say it's something like 32 had this on the docket in 2023. So this isn't just, okay,
It's
this
not
is
going to stop
people
here.
on the coasts, and I'm in the middle of the country. This is going to impact me. The majority of states are looking at some type of a retirement plan mandate for employers.
Yeah. And, again, one of the other things about this piece of legislation, sometimes there's legislation passed, Mike, and, what I try to work through with employers is, look, it's your choice. This is what you have to do. And a lot of times I have one employer in mind. He used to go, well, what'll happen if I don't, right? He always wanted to know, what will happen. Well, sometimes there aren't fines. For these mandates, these fines are hefty. And so it's not just you should do it. It could cost you some real money if you don't do it. I will say that, New York and California have state savings plans. They might not be so great, but, it's just managing it. There isn't a large cost at all. Right. So I don't think employers need to, be super nervous about this as far as costs go. But you do have to work with a professional to see, what plan is best for my organization. If I'm going to have to do this, what plan should I use? I want to be in compliance, but you should also be looking at, what's best for your industry, your employee population, and your organization, your path to growth, what makes the most sense. So I think you really do want to prep for this, talk to a professional, don't have a knee-jerk reaction. You do have to adhere to the states that mandates it, but please plan for it. Don't make it a knee-jerk reaction. Making it, if you're going to do it, do the plan that makes the most sense for your organization and again, your path to grow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So this is one of those things that this is a service that Asure provides. So is 401k retirement plan services. We talk to employers literally every single day. They don't provide any retirement plan, and they live in a state that this is mandated, but they don't know about it. This is not a lot of states haven't done tons of enforcement yet, and or they haven't done a lot of marketing and promotion and awareness about the law yet. And so when I think about how an employer could address this, of course, you don't get to choose whether you follow the law or not. You got to follow the law. So if you are required to provide retirement benefits, most states provide something in the form of really just it's a Roth IRA. It's in a lot of employers kind of stop there. Oh, it's a mandate. Okay, I'll just do that. They'll take the state plan.
Yeah.
But now you don't have a competitive differentiator between you and the employer across the street,
Right.
right? If you just without a ton of extra work, by all means, we love you to call us, but call anybody, call Fidelity, call anybody else in the 401k business. You can offer better. So if you and your competitor are competing in the same talent pool to get the best employees to your business, and your competitor is just using the state mandated IRA, which isn't great for the employer, it's not great for the employee, and you're offering a rich 401k plan that has tax benefits to you and the employee, forget about the financial benefits of 401k in general. There's a lot of ways that you can improve your employment brand and help attract employees by leaning into this mandate. You might hate it, but lean into it and use it as a competitive advantage versus just everybody signs up for the state IRA.
Right. I agree. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the next one. Pay transparency. What are the changes that are happening in pay transparency?
So this is definitely a trend that I see catching on in more and more locations. And we've talked about this before, but listen, my advice to prepare for this is to just embrace it. Right? I don't think it's going to get reversed. I don't think it's going to go away. And I'm going to be honest with you, when we're talking about the war on talent and trying to get the best people, in the seats in your organization, it does make sense to give the salary range that you're offering for the position. It's going to save you time, right? So you don't have somebody who's applying for the job. I was just helping an employer the other day. They wanted to pay about $100,000. They posted that in the ad. And it was super helpful because the person that they really wanted, to apply for the job that they were sort of talking to on the side wanted $200,000, twice as much money. And I'm like, well, good thing we didn't, go through the whole, process and then find that out. The person self-selected out. And so listen, just embrace it. My advice, even if you're not in a state that mandates pay transparency, I would put those salary ranges on your ads. You need to update your applications, Mike, because you cannot ask for past salary. You can ask for their salary requirements. So what are they looking for on an application or in an interview? And I would say that this is one of those things that please do some training. So we're really big on doing interview training, right? Interviewing for success, but also staying compliant in those interviews. So your managers also need to know, definitely in the states that mandate the pay transparency, just because you have to put the salary range in an ad doesn't mean, and you adhere to that. When you get in an interview, you still can't say, Mike, what was your last salary? So your managers need to know that. Talk about big fines and lots of lawsuits. I've already had more than one employer be sued for this. Don't forget, the Department of Labor will send out, I like to call them secret shoppers, but individuals who pretend to be applicants who are looking to trip up employers on different regulations.
I mean, there are endless ambulance chasing firms. I tease Brian, our good friend Brian Schenker. There are many of his brethren in that industry they'll just simply troll job postings looking for someone who's not compliant in their posting, apply to the job, catch you in the act, just so they can sue you, right?
Yes.
So this is silly to not be compliant. I think when people aren't
pretty simple.
I think when people aren't compliant, it's mostly out of ignorance. They don't know that law exists. Sometimes I'm like, hey, and this is going to lead me to the second part that I think is maybe the bigger issue for folks. Compliance is binary. Either you are or you're not. Probably the bigger issue for folks is if I'm paying 3 people at this job, $80,000 a year for this, and the only way I'm going to get somebody new, the market value is 100,000, and I disclose that. What am I doing with the other 3 that I got here? I don't want to lose them.
Yeah.
I
I
love them.
I I I should correct myself. This isn't really easy. I'd say the one of the more difficult states, believe it or not, is Colorado. But what employers have been saying to me is your issue that you just brought up, which is absolutely a real issue. And then in addition to that is how big of a range can I put? There's a lot of nuances to these laws. You really have to talk to a professional about it.
I think the compliance side, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier because it's binary. But the real tough conversations in pay transparency laws are how are you going to deal with your current employees if they're making below market value? And it's not
Yes,
there's some evil, cigar smoking in a boardroom. How do I extract blood from the little man? It's
right, right,
these things just happen. Market conditions change, right? Okay.
100%.
I'll move us along. I'm looking at the clock here. Pay transparency. We talked. How about leave types? You and I have said a million times. This is maybe the fastest growing area of change is leave types, paid leave, not paid leave.
It
Uh,
is. It
yeah,
is. And when I was thinking about this, I just have to give you a little story, which was, my nephew, he's a struggling student working in a restaurant, happy to see him over the holidays. And he's like, yeah, I don't get any days off. And I was like, what do you mean? Yeah, you do. You know, I know what state he lives in.
no, yeah,
I'm like, yes, you do. And he's like, no, I don't. And I was like, yeah, you do. So, the states are passing these laws because there are employers that do not, it's incomprehensible to me, but do not give any days off for employees. I've had many of an employer that I've wrote a handbook for, and I'm like, really? No, no. How do you keep people? Right? It's astounding to me. But, so again, look, employers, we should be embracing this. For some of these leave laws, the states are giving you a portion of the money. Some of these leave laws are partially paid, like New York paid family leave, California paid family leave are partially paid by the employee. So, these are really, I think in some cases, necessary laws. Again, employers embrace it. Let's put it on. Even though it's mandated, when I'm helping write an ad, I absolutely put this on an ad because a lot of times the employees don't know that these exist, and they should know coming in.
right.
This is how we attract people, right? These are some of the benefits we should be talking about. The savings plan, giving the salary that they can get, and talking about the different leaves that individuals can take. And I can tell you that, look, the handbooks we write take us, and we do handbook. We probably do, I'm going to say 20 handbook a day, Mike.
Yep.
Our handbooks are customized to the industry, to the culture, to the state, to the city, to the federal government, and they can take 5 hours. And those kind of laws, I will tell you, are probably what take us most of the time. But we want to get it right. We
Yep.
want to make it perfect for that employer, right? To engage, retain staff. And also, make it pretty clear to the employees, what leaves they can take when do they come to HR, et cetera.
I mean, this is and no joke, and this isn't self-serving. It, this is one of those things you can't rely on ChatGPT or Google because
Right.
you need a SHRM certified
It's
person
too
to
specific.
know it's so specific and it's so regional, right? So you got FMLA, right? Coming out of the CARES Act, you had certain leave types, paid leave, not paid leave.
Yeah.
But mostly this is state and local municipalities passing these leave law types. So it's
Yeah.
so specific, it's so regionalized that you got to rely on a professional here.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
general for all employers, how should they be thinking about leave in general? Because we could never list all of them on this show.
No, we couldn't. one thing I do want to bring up, two things. So we know California has laws, right? So they have leave laws, but they added bereavement leave as a mandate. And that's the first state to do that. But we're always talking about New York and California. Minnesota just enacted a paid leave program. So it's pretty spread out across the board. Here's what I'm going to tell you about leaves. When it is a mandated leave, employers need to know when an employee can take it and when they can't. So every leave is not applicable to every situation for every employee.
Yeah.
That's where you get into trouble. When you start denying leaves and say, no, Mike, you can't take bereavement leave because you can only take it for this, list of family members, and the person you're telling me falls outside of that list, you really need a professional to help you with that, because these leave laws talk about fines. These are big fines.
Yeah.
These are serious. So understanding what forms have to be filled out, how the employee is going to get paid, where the leaves are concurrent, and where they stand alone. So
That's
some
a
of the
really
states,
important topic.
oh my goodness, we could spend hours on this. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. I think in some big sweeping way, the supply of labor and demand for labor in this war for talent, this labor shortage, this is going to just do. We talked about this a lot. The war for talent is going to do nothing but continue to get harder for the next 50 years.
Yes.
The demographics are baked on this. Based on
Yes.
rates over the last 30, 50 years. So because employers are going to have to do more to attract employees, I think that's almost this supply demand of labor kind of fix. Employers are going to be more willing to be flexible when it comes to leave anyway. But again, these leave laws can be so specific with certain types of criteria that, hey, if you just took your vacation and the state says that you can have this type of leave, it's like, and I didn't know about that. I'm like, okay, you just took 2 weeks and now you just added 3 more days and now you had a death in the family and there's this bereavement. I'm a small business owner. I'm out of business if you're gone for a month. I can't do it. I can't pay you that much. And so maybe these things happen concurrently, and so one nullifies the other. It just gets so complex so fast. You got to get professional opinions. And again, whether it's us or somebody else, you need a certified person, because Google and ChatGPT, I love them. They will not point you to authoritative sources.
No, sir.
Yeah. All right. 2 more topics I want to cover here. So, cannabis. Marijuana is still illegal federally. If you want to do business, I mean, I know in the payroll HR business, the big national banks won't touch cannabis businesses because it's still illegal federally. Now, clearly, there's a wave happening of medical and recreational use at the state level.
Yeah.
How the heck should employers be thinking about cannabis? And okay, it's not legal in my state. Can people do it at work? Is it off duty? I mean, take us through that.
So I laugh because, a lot of employers are like, well, it's legal in our state, so Joe's smoking a doobie at lunchtime. What can I do? And I'm like, would you let him take shots of bourbon during his lunch? Right. So I try to make it, a little easier to understand.
Alcohol is legal.
Right? And alcohol is legal everywhere. But, depending on your age. But so it does become complex. The testing is complex. So what I need employers to think about and look at and talk to me about is, what state are you in? Do you have any exceptions that you're allowed to test for cannabis? Because there's a lot of states that will not allow you, if you're doing drug testing, to add cannabis to the list. But the new statutes that I see coming out are about off-duty use, right? So I'm going to hire Mike Vinoy. I go on your social media and I see that you've got a picture of yourself, smoking cannabis, and you have a line there, that's what you were doing, and I decide not to hire you. There's a lot of states that are now saying you cannot, you know, not hire somebody, right? Or hold them back in any employment situation due to off duty use of cannabis. And, New York has that already for alcohol, actually, as well. So, look, the whole social media thing is a big deal. Again, your managers need to be trained on what they can and cannot do, as far as social media, and just, sort of related here, some states are prohibiting employers from demanding social media information from candidates and employees. Like, hey, Mike, I need your, Instagram, social media, TikTok. I need to be connected to you there. Many states are prohibiting employers from demanding that information. So a lot to unpack there as well, Mike. So I just, I'm letting everybody, let's be aware of that, work with us on what you're going to do. What's your go forward plan on testing and off duty use?
Yeah, very good. All right, last one. You're saying you mentioned that there's a lot of more scrutiny around disability claims. What do you mean by that?
So let me, I'm going to give another example. So we had an employer, they were a manufacturer. One of the women on the line was pregnant. Her manager very kindly walked over to her and said, hey, Jane, I see, the pregnancy, you're pregnant, you're a little bit difficult. I'm going to take you off the line and I'm going to sit you over there on the chair and I'm going to have you do something else so you don't have to stand.
Yeah.
Now I know what's wrong with that, but I'm guessing that our listeners are thinking, well, that sounds nice, Mary. What's wrong with that? Yeah. That ended up in a lawsuit, right? Because that could have an impact on Jane's future earnings. So Jane's concern was, you took me off my regular job duties without me asking, and it wasn't behavioral based, right? It was just because I was pregnant.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing could occur, for any other physical, restriction that somebody would have. Here's what I need everybody to understand. Number one, ads and job descriptions should have physical requirements, even if it's a desk job. And I'm going to say again that your interviewers need to be trained on what they can ask, and your managers have to be trained on how to work with disabilities within the workplace, what they can and cannot say and do when it comes to an employee having a disability.
I can imagine having this conversation with my 84-year-old father, and him just talking about this is what's wrong with the world, that you can't help out. I mean, the chivalrous intent here is obvious, right? I think good HR practices kind of point. I always come back to competencies in skill requirements and in job descriptions. If you're,
I agree. I mean, listen, the employer, and I've had this situation more than once, believe it or not. And they're like, well, what should I have done? And I said, ask her if she needed a chair to do the current job she was doing.
Bingo. I mean,
that's pretty easy, but that's where the training comes in, right? That's why we like to train managers in HR 101.
Yeah.
Right. Because you don't know what you don't know.
Job description. What is required to do this job? What are the competencies and skills required to perform that job? And then everything flows from that. And it's like, you know what? How's the pregnancy going? Can I get you a chair? Is there anything we can do to make it more comfortable? I mean, you just ask, but put it on the employee and let them tell you, and then you can make accommodations all day long. But just ask them. Yeah. Mary, we're about at time. You've been sprinkling in through all 7 of these, the kind of what you should be doing, whether it's an FLSA audit or your job descriptions, your interview training, big picture, without kind of going through each of the 7, what would be some of the big buckets that you would want to be guiding employers about, how they should be thinking, what practically should they be doing starting, say, tomorrow, to prepare for these employment law changes?
Yeah. And you said it, definitely. I would get going on a Fair Labor Standards Act audit, right? So you're looking at how you're paying people and classifying people, right? So 2 different things. Part of that FLSA audit I would recommend is, that you should look at some of the EEO statistics as well. So if you're pulling a payroll report, don't just look at position and salary, look at position, sex, and if you have any of the EEO, any of the other EEO information, I would look at that. Because if you're going to look at it, let's look at it holistically, not just for the impact due to the raise in salaries, but also, is there any disparate impact or, discrimination going on in the protected classes. And we talked about a handbook. I would absolutely look at your handbook, your on and offboarding paperwork. Posting requirements tend to change in the beginning of the year, so I would look at that as well. And don't forget about training your managers. Your managers need to be trained in most of the things that we talked about. They're your boots on the ground. They're talking to your employees every day. Best way to keep the company moving forward and out of a court of law is training your managers.
Yeah, I think this is if I had to pick one place where employers get in trouble, the employer may be really well-intentioned, but they are unaware of what is happening on their own shop, because all of that interaction between the frontline manager and the frontline employee, right? And whether there's cultural issues, there's discriminatory issues, that's where it all happens. And you might just be blind to it. And so I can probably think of no better advice for employers for 2024 than, certainly we'd love to help you, but however you get your help, that you train your frontline managers, you train your management staff on best practices in HR.
Agreed.
Any final words that you want to give everyone if they're on a mission to grow their business in 2024, Mary?
Just keep focusing on HR. It's no longer a cost center. It is your way to be successful, right? So keep focusing on HR as a way to help you grow, and not, and not something that you have to worry about, right? Keep watching our webinars. We'll take the worry out of that equation.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you need a team. So with that, until next week's episode, thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mike.
And thanks to everybody else. That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrow.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Asure. Asure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Asure can help your business grow, visit AsureSoftware.com. Until next time.